Hello and welcome to the Maths of Music episode 6. We have made it. This is the last episode in the series, sadly, but it is the episode I have most been looking forward to making because this week I'm going to talk about wind instruments. I am a woodwind player, so I play wind instruments. I'm very passionate about that. Hopefully you enjoyed my recording that I did for the introduction and to show you what you can do with some of these instruments. In that recording you will have seen me playing the alto saxophone here, but the tenor saxophone was also featuring playing the bass line to that. I didn't play the drums. That was a little bit of garage band, just trying to fill it in there, making it a little bit more interesting because I am not a percussion player. Now, this today is all completely new content. Everything else in this in this series has been derived from my talk which I did for the Institute of Maths called The Maths of Music. And if some of you have seen that talk and enjoyed it, and hopefully you've enjoyed this series, today this episode is completely new. I have not spoken about this stuff before in my talk, so I'm very excited for today. And to help get things going, what I did was I asked some friends of mine, what questions would you like me to answer about wind instruments? This is exactly what I did for my original talk. Wanted them to know what they wanted me to answer in that original talk. I then put that into video form and I've extended that for this episode. So here is the first question. What instruments do I play? Well, I play a little bit of keyboard or piano, as you have seen, not very well, but I do play a little bit of that. And then I'm mainly, however, a wind player. I'm a woodwind player. So the smallest instrument which I play, not overly well, but it's the recorder. The instrument which we all start to learn in school, but unfortunately or fortunately, if you are a parent, we normally don't continue with it because it can sound a little bit like a squawk stick. So I play the recorder. It's a little bit of fun. I didn't keep it up when I was in school, but I bought one a few years ago to be able to just play and have a little bit of fun with. However, that's not my main instrument. I then play the flute. I picked this up about 2 years ago. I purchased a flute, and I have to say I'm very enjoying playing it. It's fun, it sounds so beautiful as an instrument, and it's something I've always wanted to be able to play, but never really got round to learning until I was able to purchase one a few years ago. And it's just great fun, I enjoy it, and it's been a challenge for me learning something new, learning a new instrument. Now we are coming on to the instruments which are my speciality, the instruments which I do play the best, the ones which I've played for many years now. Since I was 7 or 8 I've played this one, and that's the clarinet. This is my clarinet. If anyone's interested in the type of clarinet, it's a Buffet RC. It's a lovely instrument to play. It's my favourite instrument out of all the ones I have to play, and it's the one which I would say it's the one that I am the best at. Probably because I played it the longest, probably because it's the one I practiced the most. But is it the most fun? No. No, it's not the most fun. Because, as most people will say, the saxophone is more fun. It looks better. It sounds better. It's cooler. And why is that? Well, it's because it's the saxophone and, you know, it looks great. This is my alto saxophone. I only purchased this back in June or July. It's a Selmer. It's made out of bronze. It's a lovely, lovely instrument to play. And I love it. And I think it sounds great. And you will have heard me play it in the intro. Yes, the recording quality was terrible. I'm sorry about that, but I'm in a lockdown and I don't have access to any proper recording equipment. But it's great fun. I love it. It sounds great and it plays fantastically. Then we move on to the largest instrument which I own, but not the largest instrument which I play. So this is the tenor saxophone, and this is made out of a nickel silver metal body. It's a P. Marriott saxophone. It's a beautiful instrument. It sounds incredible. It plays fantastically, and it's just a great instrument to play, and I thoroughly love playing it, and it has a very, very nice sound. You'll have also heard me playing this in the intro doing the bass line. So, yeah, these are the instruments I play. They're all called woodwind instruments, despite the fact that only one of them, the clarinet, is made out of wood. So why are they called woodwind? Well, the clarinet, the flute, and the recorder, they're called woodwind because traditionally they were made out of wood. So all of these, when they were originally made back in the 1700s, were made out of wood, and that's where the name woodwind came from. However, recently it's evolved to mean more how the instrument makes sound. So although the flute and the saxophones are made out of metal, traditionally the saxophone's made out of brass. And we have all heard of brass instruments, trumpets, trombones, tubas, things like that. So why did the saxophone fall into the woodwind family, despite the fact that it was originally made out of materials that the brass instruments made out of? Well, it's because woodwind instruments, normally with the exception of the flute, use a reed to make sound and have a mouthpiece. So here is a mouthpiece and there is the reed. And what happens is as you blow into it, the reed vibrates, and as it vibrates, that creates the sound. And so you use a piece of wood to create the sound, and that's why they call it a woodwind instrument now. The saxophone, this is my alto saxophone mouthpiece, and if I hold that up to my clarinet mouthpiece, you can see that they're very similar. And it's for that reason that we say the saxophone is a woodwind instrument, because it uses the same method to make the sound, although it's slightly bigger in terms of the reed. And if you listen to it, it sounds about the same. There's not really any different in terms of what the mouthpieces produce. Which then leads on to the question of, okay, well, how do these instruments sound different? And this just so happened to be question number 2. So, how do wind instruments make sound? Well, we've already spoken about how a clarinet and saxophone make sound. It has a mouthpiece and a reed, and as you blow into it, that reed vibrates and causes a sound wave to propagate down the instrument. Now, a recorder doesn't have a reed, and instead it has a little lip in here that as you blow into it, air passes over that lip and causes a tone. Much in the same way as blowing over a bottle top. Now, then, as that propagates down the instrument, we change the sound that we hear by shortening or lengthening the instrument. And this is the same for brass instruments. They use a different method to create that initial sound wave, but ultimately you change the note by lengthening or shortening the instrument. In brass instruments, they do this by pressing valves to literally divert the air through a different pipe, which is longer. But for wind instruments, we have a series of holes or keys. The saxophone has a lot of keys, but a simple instrument like the recorder just has holes, which you can cover with your fingers. And the more holes you cover, the longer the tube and the lower the note. So when I've got all my fingers pressed down, that's the lowest note. Now we can demonstrate this again on a slightly larger beer bottle with a slightly smaller beer bottle. I told you I needed some props in the last episode. And when I blow over the top of the larger one, you get a lower note. And you can see this one's longer than this one, and it's also slightly wider in diameter. So is it just the length, or is it the diameter as well that affects the note? Well, again, we can only look at the length of the tube with a recorder. But now let's look at the clarinet. Well, the clarinet's also longer, so we'd expect the lowest note to be lower. So if I play an E, which is the lowest note on the clarinet, all my fingers down, all these extra keys pressed down as well, it is indeed lower. So that's much longer than the recorder, so far we are confident that the length is affecting the sound. But let's now go to the flute. The flute doesn't have a reed, just has a hole, and as you blow over it, it creates a sound. Same as with the beer bottle. So if I take my flute and I just play a G on it, which is just 1, 2, 3 fingers, then that's a G at 392 Hertz. I know that because I measured it. And then if I take the tenor saxophone, and on this I play an A, which is 2 fingers, what it actually does is, on the tenor saxophone, it's in what we call a different key. The flute is pitched in C, the tenor saxophone is pitched in B flat. So when I play an A on this, it's actually playing a G as you would hear on the flute. And so if I play an A, right, what you hear is the sound of a G, but it's not the same G that we heard before. In fact, it's a G an octave below at 196 Hertz. So the flute plays a G at 392 Hertz, and the tenor saxophone with the same fingering or the equivalent fingering plays a G at 196 Hertz. Now you can say, well, that instrument's a lot bigger, it's a lot longer, okay, but the distance from where the air goes in to where the air comes out on the flute here is approximately, give or take a few millimeters, 40 centimeters. Okay? Give or take. It's about 40 centimeters. On the tenor saxophone, the gap to where the air comes out, so from it going in at the top of the mouthpiece here to coming out here, is 68 centimeters. So yes, it is indeed longer. But if we think back a long time now to, I think it was episode 2, where we spoke about different frequencies and wavelengths and how they relate to each other, what we discovered was that if you half the frequency, you double the wavelength. So I've halved the frequency of the flute, of the note the flute made to get to the tenor sax, but the length of the instrument has not doubled. It is not 80 centimeters to get the same note. And indeed, when you look at the diameter of the internal bore, the flute here, and then when you look at the saxophone here, you can see it's much, much wider. It's got a much larger diameter. So because the length is not strictly doubled, we can tell that the diameter must be having some sort of an effect, similar to with string instruments, how it wasn't just the length of the string, but it was also the mass per unit length or the thickness of the string. Okay, so the third question I received was, what is a register key and how does it work? Well, on the clarinet, there's this key at the back which is called the register key. You also have the same key here on the saxophone. But on the saxophone it's called an octave key, which is due to the fact that what the register key does is it changes the register or the octave that you are playing in. So if I hold all my fingers down and don't press the register key on my clarinet, I'll play the lowest note on the instrument, which is an E. Now if I don't change my fingerings other than pressing the register key, I'll play a B, a 12th higher. Similarly, if I press just my thumb down on the clarinet and play an F, if I press the register key, I'll play a note 12th higher, which is a C. Now on the saxophone, the jump is not a 12th, it is an octave, an 8th, and that's why on the saxophone it's called an octave key. Now on the flute, we do not have a register key. If you want to change the octave that you play in, so if I hold just three fingers down to play a G, if I want to play a G an octave higher, I physically need to change my embouchure to mean that the frequency of the note that I create when I blow is an octave higher. And that's how you change the octave on a flute. So why does this work and what does it do? Well, on the flute, hopefully you can see that all I'm doing is literally changing what I blow into the instrument. But on a clarinet and a saxophone, I'm not doing that. There's something interesting going on inside the instrument, which is changing the frequency when I press this little button, because all it's doing is opening a hole. But that hole isn't causing the note to just suddenly play quieter up here. Higher up here as all the other holes. It's doing something different. And in order to understand that, we now need to delve into the maths. So here we go. Any wind instrument is essentially just a long pipe which is open at both ends. We may consider one end being the end that is in our mouth and the other end in a brass instrument, just the bell, or on a woodwind instrument, any of the open holes that you use to create the sound to lengthen or shorten the tube. So if we consider here a tube of length L, then we make some assumptions, which is that the pressure variation within the tube, P, depends only on the distance x along the tube and time. Then we can say at each end the pressure can vary freely, but it must be continuous and equal to the pressure outside of the tube. So at the end that's open to the atmosphere, the pressure must be equal to whatever the atmospheric pressure is, and the pressure in your mouth must be equal to whatever the pressure in your mouth is. However, these pressures can indeed vary, so these are not fixed and constant. We can express this constraint via a Neumann boundary condition. The derivative of P with respect to x is 0 at both ends of the tube. This is ever so slightly different to the boundary condition we used in the string example, where we had Dirichlet boundary conditions, where at each end the string was fixed. The equivalent Dirichlet boundary condition here would be to say that the pressure is fixed at 0 at both ends of the tube. However, the pressure can indeed vary at each end of the tube, and consequently this boundary condition would not represent the physics of the problem. Instead, it can be shown that the Neumann boundary conditions do indeed represent the physics. Unsurprisingly, given that the tube is filled with air, we can show that the governing equation for the propagation of waves inside this tube is indeed the wave equation for air, except the wave speed is ever so slightly different. It is not the standard speed of sound in air, c, but is rather a scaled speed of sound in air, where s is the speed of sound within the tube is equal to the speed of sound in air divided by the cross-sectional area of the tube. Once again, as we did for waves on a string,
This can be solved via the separation of variables, and the solution is shown on the screen now. It is ever so slightly different, whereas we now have cosines instead of sines in the solution. This is a consequence of the Neumann boundary condition. In addition to this, there are multiple solutions, one each for every value of n greater than or equal to 0 that is an integer. The reason why multiple solutions is possible is because on a wind instrument the sound that you hear is very dependent on the initial sound that is created via your embouchure or the mouthpiece. As I demonstrated on the flute, I can change the octave that is played just by changing my embouchure. And for this reason, depending on how I form my embouchure, a different sound wave will form inside the instrument. However, universally for all frequencies we can observe that the frequency will reduce as the length of the instrument increases and as the cross-sectional area increases. So just one question remains, and that is, how does a register key work? Register keys are positioned at the length L from the end of the instrument which you blow into, where the total length of the instrument is a multiple of this little distance L. And it is designed so that it does not act as a normal tone hole, i.e. when you open it, it does not act as an open end of the tube, but rather when it is opened, it acts as an extra boundary condition which ensures the pressure disturbance at that point inside the instrument is 0. And what this means is that the wave inside the instrument will always have a node at that point. And thus, the sound that you hear will be a combination of wavelengths which will ensure it has a node at that point, rather than allowing it to vary freely at that point, thus raising the frequency of the note that you hear.
So there we go. We're done. Thank you so much for sticking with me for the very long period of time it's taken me to finish this off. I have thoroughly enjoyed making these videos, and I've been asked by some colleagues at work if I'm going to make videos on the maths of something else. I have a few ideas, but as I've sort of alluded to anyway, I've become very busy recently. So I don't know how long it may take me to produce more videos in the Maths of series, and I don't really know what the topics will be. Maybe it'll be the maths of beer or the maths of space or something like that. I don't know. But I would like to thank you all for staying tuned, for enjoying these videos, for giving me some really positive feedback, most of you. There's been a little bit of negative feedback, but the internet is full of trolls, so I'll take it. Over 90% of the feedback has been very good, so I'm a statistician, I'll take that as a win. Most people don't get 90% in any exams, so I'll take that. Thank you once again. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to stick a question in the comments, or if you know me personally, drop me an email. I'll try and answer them. Otherwise, have a great day, everyone, and maybe see you soon. Maybe not. We will see. Thank you. Bye.